Iris Stevens is back with us. She's a coordinator for the Northeast Arkansas Tea Party. Iris, how are you?
I'm just doing great.
It's always great to have you. Now, I wanted to have you on, wanted to get a follow up on this situation, the fallout of the situation where the people of, I think the people of Jonesboro successfully lobbied the superintendents around
Mm-hmm.
here to not use taxpayer dollars to bus students on over to hear a transgender author at the local library. And the media has since, I feel like, mischaracterized the conservative position completely on this.
Completely. They were pretty ugly about it, just as were some of the letter writers, but that's okay. I just had a column earlier, I guess it was Tuesday, that stated our position that yes, this is a taxpayer issue because it shows how this idea, the transgender identity, and how this is going about through schools, uh, they're using our taxpayer dollars to infiltrate our culture with this. And we've already talked about the studies that show that this is a disorder and that we don't necessarily want to be treating a disorder as if it were something that, a disease that you can't,
Yeah.
that you can't avoid.
Well, even if it was normalized, like the LGB community,
Yes.
that's now been normalized.
Yes, it has.
But it's one thing to normalize it. This is celebrating it. I feel like.
It's celebrating it, but also what's tragic is the fact that the sad lives that a lot of these people lead, and they, of course, a lot of people say, well, that's because of the bigotry they face, but it's not, because even when they live in an open society and are not treated badly, they still have issues because the underlying issue is what's the problem. The transgender identity is simply the symptom, one of the symptoms of the problems that they have.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing this as a much larger issue than simply, okay, you have this teen author who's transgender wrote this successful book, but then shortly after that, last week we're talking about this little boy
Yes,
in a
in
divorce
Texas.
case, and his mom wants to give him hormone blockers when he turns 11, and we have people on the left who agree. We have people on the left who think it was outrageous that the students didn't get bussed over there,
Yes.
and those same people also believe that an 11-year-old, there's nothing wrong with an 11-year-old getting hormone blockers and completely ruining the rest of the kid's life.
Yeah, and that's very serious, very, very serious. That happened in Texas, and it's ongoing. I think the Texas Attorney General has stepped in and said, wait a minute,
Yeah.
we're going to investigate. But the only reason is because it got so much publicity. And this is going on all over the world. We've got the youngest one, I think, has been 4, and that was in Australia, where the parents allowed them to start undergoing this gender transition. And I'm sorry, it's insane. We don't even let our kids take medicine, take an aspirin to school, but yet we're going to say that they can make the determination about this before they're adults? No, absolutely not. And it should be prohibited. It should be illegal for either the parents or the children to push themselves into this because this is permanent.
Yeah.
The drugs that they give, the hormone blockers, they're cancer causing, some of them are, but they basically cause sterility, and a lot of this cannot be undone once it's done. Once you go through the surgical reassignment, it cannot be undone.
Yeah,
Successfully.
I wanted to be He-Man, and my parents were not allowed to give me anabolic steroids when I was,
Exactly.
5 or 6 years old.
Good point.
But and again, Rand Paul made a good point on this. You can't smoke, you can't drink, but you're gonna be able to take these chemicals. Let's talk. We're talking to Iris Stevens. Let's talk a little bit about schools, because this is the problem that Arkansans need to be aware of,
It's coming.
because they're putting this now in the curriculum where they're basically going to get your child to believe that 2 + 2 = 5 when it comes to this gender thing.
Four states have already, and it may be more than that now, but states that have legalized putting this into the curriculum. Now, it goes along with the LGBTQ, but it also focuses on transgender specifically as young as pre-K. So and we have curriculum guides in schools now, and you teach this and this and this at this age, and they have encoded this down into the pre-K. Arkansas at this point does not mandate, unless I'm very mistaken, I've looked it up lately, we do not mandate sex education in the schools. We kind of let the schools take care of how much they want to do of that and the health classes and whatnot. But the majority of states out there do. And while the majority of states are not yet encoding this in the curriculum, keep in mind that Texas is. We hear about the Austin situation there, where they've legitimized this a very terrible, terrible curriculum for this. California is one of the states that statewide is doing this. And who writes our textbooks? The states who have the most students. So if you're going to get a textbook, you're going to get this in it. Parents need to be taking a look at the kids' textbooks to see how this is dealt with. They started out with saying, we want people to know about the famous people in history that were LGBTQ, ad infinitum. It's morphed into that, and it always does. That's what is unfortunate. It will start at point A, and it always morphs into way more than what most parents ever considered helpful.
Yeah, and back to the younger boy or any of these kids who are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A lot of them don't even know what sex is yet.
No,
and
they
don't
don't
even care what sex about that yet. And so it's like we're the ones, generally, we're the ones obsessed with sex, and we're putting it on now. And could it get worse? I mean, if we're gonna, this is what I think, and this is gonna be controversial, but I'm sorry. If you're gonna normalize, and celebrate this idea that if somebody thinks that they're a man trapped in a boy's body, first of all, I have great empathy for that. Like I would, if that's what you truly believe, that's got to be a terrible existence. And that's why I think so many people thought it was a psychological disorder. Mm-hmm. But if we're willing to say that it's okay to chemically castrate somebody when they're not even fully developed and not allow their DNA to unpack and create the body plan that is been put into play, we're going to do that to a child, I think you're getting really close to pedophilia. And I know that may be a leap that people don't want to make of normalizing that, but
it's on the horizon. If you read,
you're sexualizing kids in that way.
If you read as much as I do, you can see that that's already on the horizon. They have already suggested that pedophilia itself, as long as it's not acted on, not be considered a crime or a problem or anything, that as long as you don't act on it, well, the next step of course is, but this is already in the works. When you read it, people would think that it's not, that's too outrageous, but it's not. It is in the down the horizon, and you can see it. And I know there was a letter in the paper the other day that said that it's the next step, and it may be 2 or 3 steps down, but it is on the way.
Well, I've already seen the people in some leftist cities protest with signs that talk about that. I mean, there's now standing up for. I mean, it's just, we're so conditioned now in this country to, if you claim you're a victim,
yes,
and if you claim that you're born that way,
yes,
then we're like, oh, okay, all right, well then that's totally fine. You do you. It's
exactly.
Like, well, we got to have some line somewhere,
Well, but you don't now, because when you get, and of course I'm Christian, when you get that far away from what God said in the Bible, this is what His standard was. Nothing is illegitimate. Yeah. Then nothing is. You can make an excuse for everything.
Yeah, it's more like a Nietzsche, or it's like, well, there's really no difference between me hugging or raping you. I know that's you know what I'm saying? It's all the same. Well, look, it doesn't matter.
A generation ago, abortion, we legalized it in 1973. Before that, it was really, really horrible. And now we haven't just legalized abortion. We've legalized it in a lot of places up to the day of birth. And the governor of Virginia said it would really be okay after birth, if for you to take a few days to decide whether or not you want to keep that child. I can't even use a word that describes that. Yeah. It's unimaginable where we've gone. And all people have to do is to look at that issue, look at where a generation ago, homosexuals, it was considered a disorder. They, hadn't taken it out of the DSM yet. And now it's not considered disorder. It's considered perfectly normal and happy and legitimate, except for those of us who are Christians who say, wait a minute, God said something else. But He also said other things about other sexual practices. That's not the only one.
Correct.
So you have to be consistent.
Right. Well, and so back to this used to be considered, until very recently, the idea of being trans and wanting to go through the surgery and all of that was considered.
It was a disorder. It was called gender identity disorder. It had been in the DSM. That's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for the American Psychological Association. It has gradually been removed, just as homosexuality was removed, and then considered just an alternate and a gender dysphoria now, because we have a difference between how we see ourselves and what our biology is.
But there was a man who used to do these surgeries.
Dr. Paul McHugh, who was the lead psychiatrist at the Johns Hopkins, dealt with this issue for years. Johns Hopkins, and he had done the sexual reassignments, but he had done enough study and enough dealing with these to realize these transgender surgeries did not have the effect that that he was hoping they would. It did not solve the problem. So, several years ago, and I don't remember exactly what the year was, he said, we need to stop this. So Johns Hopkins quit. Well, within the last 2 years now, transgender has become so politically correct that Johns Hopkins has picked up and started doing the surgery, even though we have excellent studies that show that as a rule, the surgery does not alleviate the problems that transgender identity has, these people have. And they have basically excoriated Dr. McHugh. You can't even mention him when you are doing writings about this, because the whole left side comes out and says, he's a hater, he was a doctor who dealt with these people. And he has no problem with them personally. He says this is not an effective treatment. So you can't even make the slightest comment that's negative about this condition, the group of people, or anything without the people coming out of the woodwork and claiming that you're a bigot, you're a hater, you're an awful person. Just look at the letters that were written in response to Joyce Cooks, who made a factual letter.
Yeah, and so that's what's disturbing me is on this issue, even in our local community, like here in Jonesboro or across the state of Arkansas, which is considered to be, socially at least, a very, conservative state. But we have people in the press and the media that are so worried about being called a bigot. I think they have completely embraced this as a legitimate lifestyle. We've got to surrender. We lost the LGB argument, and this is just we've got to just step back. And it's like, well, hang on a second. I don't think there's anything bigoted about what we're talking about.
Not the factual.
There's even some gay and lesbian individuals who are like, we should have never allowed the trans community to partner with us because it's not even the same thing anymore.
Exactly. They didn't, years ago, they did not want to be a part of that. And then they went through this where we're going to gather everybody to be part of a collective. But I've just read a couple of articles fairly recently where the lesbian and gay community is saying this is not the same thing, and we need to reconsider this being part of what we are. So that's, But I wasn't even talking necessarily about the media. The media has made it pretty clear how they feel. But we had 6 letters supporting the total opposite of what we had said and what Ms. Cook had said, and basically what I said in my column the other day, who were defending the author. And nobody was attacking the author. Well, there may have been, but it was not meant to be attacking the author. It was meant to be cautioning about what the author represents and we want to do. Yes, because there have been some new studies. I've got one here. I can't, I don't want to read it, but it talks about 87% of students who had gotten into the literature, the online, the friends, media, and all of that were far more apt to claim that they were transgender than the regular people. So the more you expose these kids to this, the more apt you are to have kids say, that's me. Well, some of the letter writers would say, well, that's appropriate. They're finding themselves. No, it's not, because true transgender, as a rule, happens much earlier than that. And you just don't start out at 15 and, go online and see all your friends and all this kind of stuff. And this is the latest popular craze, and then decide that that's what you are. But of course, it would result in life-changing decisions.
Well, and it's really set up for a teenage conversion, if you will, because when I was a teenager, I thought that anything bad happened that would happen to me, it was happening to me for the first time, and no one else had
Exactly.
ever experienced it. That's just how you
Yeah.
are as you're a
History
young
begins
person.
the day you were born.
Right, exactly. So no one has ever experienced this level of pain or this level of hurt or this level of anger or whatever. Well, with the LGBTQ movement, there's an unlimited amount of potential genders.
Exactly. Well,
So,
Facebook recognizes 52 genders.
right, but if you right, Joe, if you actually listen to some of these folks, they say it's an unlimited. Is that
Right.
correct? Like unlimited amount of genders. So it's actually perfect for these teenagers who will actually be able to say, well, here's a movement that actually claims scientifically, which is totally bogus science, that this is I'm so unique that I was created and I am this gender and this section,
Exactly,
this non-binary
exactly.
or whatever, and so it's could be very tempting for young minds.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you start thinking this is not something that you just adopt and read the books and goth movement and some things
Yeah.
like that, punk movement, this is something that to be fully part of, you have chemical hormones that are castration. You also go through, if you go the whole 9 yards, you have gender reassignment surgery, which is not very well undone. It makes a permanent change for people, teenagers who I've taught for years, who are going through probably the most tumultuous period of their lives anyway. It's just not, it's very frightening for parents. And that's why I think people need to know about this. You need to know what's going on out there. People have been broadsided by their kids coming in and saying, I am transgender. I was born, this, but I'm not really that. And parents who are not aware of what's going on, or grandparents, or any, teachers or whatever, are just broadsided if they're not familiar with what's going on out there.
Yeah. So definitely, I think this is an effort. For those of you just joining us, if you don't know, this is an effort to be left of bang. I mean, it was kind of already here. The issue's already here, but it's going to get worse if it's in Texas. It's going to be here in Arkansas. And so, from a state standpoint, I think we definitely need to have legislation that says it's illegal for parents to give their kids hormone blockers before they're 18.
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. If
know.
we can't let kids smoke or vape
Yeah.
before they're 18, how dare we
Yeah.
even consider doing something that's permanent to them
Yeah,
for something that has got legitimate studies showing the danger?
absolutely. Well, Iris, I really appreciate it. You have anything else to add?
No, except that we are very thankful to the superintendents who stepped
Yes.
up and said this is not going to happen. Most of them didn't have a clue. Superintendents are above here, teachers are down here. They don't, commonly interact that much, and so we just appreciate that didn't. And it also educated everybody in this community about what was going on and why people do need to be looking at what's going on in the schools, look what's going on, in the library, look what's going on that your kids are being exposed to.
Yeah.
I think it was a very excellent educational.
I agree,
situation.
and again, I want to say, I have great empathy for people who are experiencing this type of I feel like I'm this, but I'm this or whatever. But there's a difference between having empathy, but then as a society, as a
Celebrating it.
culture, celebrating it, and that's not something that I don't think
Well,
we
I
can do.
don't. It's the problem in using analogies with things like this is it can be really insulting. But to me, it looks an awfully lot like when you have somebody come in who's convinced he's Napoleon, and we don't give him the keys to France.
Right. Right.
But I'm sorry. To me, the analogy is pretty close. Is
Yeah.
that we have people who are for years thought they were one thing or thought they were another person, and we try to deal with them gently and say, no, this is not so.
Yeah,
And
we give
deal
them
with the underlying
treatment.
problem. Yes,
Yeah. We don't give them a hat and
exactly.
and participate in the delusion. Ira Stevens, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.